Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Student of the Game. I am Kyle Nass, the Student of the Game. And listen, if you're here, chances are you like talking sport and you're glad to do it with us here tonight. Of course, listen, lots of things moving in the sports world, a lot of stuff going on. I know that there's a lot of focus on the March Madness. We'll get into that more at another time as we further that along. We'll talk about a bit here too. NFL Rules Committee dropping stuff. A lot of stuff and a lot of movement in free agency is concluded. We'll actually talk to Zach Shultz of Yards Per and a buddy of mine that writes also for the Jaguar Report. Bing! You see, the Bing is not going to work with my messed up voice. Okay, I can't give the Bings for the endorsement in this episode. As you guys can probably hear, I'm playing the hurt. But nonetheless, I'll still get plenty of help, like I said, from Zach Shultz. And then after that, hey, listen, it's Easter weekend, and apparently the XFL and USFL have also risen. We'll have also Reid Johnson of the Markcast here to kind of talk about what we should look out for in that opening weekend session. A lot of good stuff here on the show. Of course, you got to be listening to the podcast elements. Listen, all the places you want to find it. On your podcast catchers, you'll find the Student of the Game Duval Dive this weekend, of course, Friday morning, 11 a.m. with my guy Travis Holmes. Find that as well on the 3-point conversion, iHeart, as well as oldschool101.com, 12 to 2 in the sports block, part of the Student of the Game action there as well. All of the YouTube streams, all that happy stuff. But let's get into it. Sartoba Media, huddle up, all that happy stuff. We'll get it. I want to get into this because I've got a few things I want to hit in the intro. First of all, mentioning the spring football leagues, the XFL, though it is now officially in the past as we've come to know and love it, albeit for one season, their kickoff rules have been approved by the NFL. So you'll have that whole situation of there being a landing zone. Nobody on the kickoff team can move until the ball is fielded or hits the ground in that landing zone, and the players will be 5 yards apart on the 30 and 35. In other words, no long runs, no charging, no gunners or anything like that, and the collisions won't be as devastating and dangerous. I mean, listen, it actually looks like the league cares about player safety for 30 seconds. They don't give a damn if you come back from the dead and, you know, give Joe Flacco a comeback player of the year award, but they'll definitely adjust the kickoff. And honestly, I think it's a good thing to revive returns, actually be back in the game for the NFL and also doing it more safely. But by the same token, I'm curious about the fact that the UFL themselves won't be using those rules here come this weekend. So I don't get what's going on there with that part. I'll talk with Reid Johnson about it in the back part of the show there too. That's all very strange. Meanwhile, though, the NFL Rules Committee, for all it did right with doing that, decided to ban the hip tackle or whatever, the hip drop tackle or whatever that is. And listen, I have to be honest, I didn't think this was going to go through. And lo and behold, here we are, absolutely blowing it. Once again, the NFL Rules Committee. So here's what I'm hopeful of. It'll be one of these rules, kind of like an offensive runner leading with the helmet or the crown of the helmet. It's on the books. It's just rarely called. I think this is something that's going to be in there that we don't see called very, I hope, I should say, that doesn't get called very much. But this could range from anywhere. We're adding another 30 yards at least, perhaps each defense on a field. So both teams per game, at least in my mind, just because it's not so much that they're outlawing something to protect the players, which I know that's the intent, but they're outlawing tackling, sort of, or at least tackling from behind. So I guess if we're going to try to tackle Tyreek Hill, that might be an issue because the only way you're going to catch him is if he has to slow down and you reach him from behind typically. I don't know. That whole thing's a mess. But the part I can't get past personally is for all the complaining there is about officiating and all that, which the XFL, going back to that, seemed to kind of solve with having Dean Blandino in the booth and commentating through challenges and things like that. A great feature. Really think the NFL should adopt that too, but you know, what do I know? I'm just a student of the game, right? But to ask the officials that we constantly criticize, then, hey, by the way, you guys suck, but do more. What are we doing here, guys? What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? What are we asking for of these people who we claim to be wildly incompetent, yet please save our game with this nearly impossible to enforce rule? You can't get pass interference right, but you're going to get hip drop tackles right. How about no? See, even my impressions are shot. And, of course, my dude Mickey's in the comments. Good to see you, buddy. Yeah, flag football. Normally, I find that to be a lazy take, but with the hip drop tackle, that we could get to that point. Protecting concussions is one thing. Horse collar tackles is one thing. This is going to be I have issues with this one is what I'll say. But speaking of things that were wildly incompetent, I know we don't talk women's basketball a lot on this podcast. I know we know the big names by now, Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, and the whole situation that took place last year. Apparently doing a John Cena thing's a problem, whatever, and I don't know why we talked about it so much last year. It's not like we could see it anyway. See what I did there? Anyways, but now there's another scandalous thing over and above Caitlin Clark, being criticized for her, let's just say, passionate commentary about the plays going on and talking to officials and things like that. LSU coach Kim Mulkey now in the news big time, going on the offensive about a Washington, it's a Washington Post article, yeah, that's threatening to come out. Ain't gonna work, buddy, and things like that, and talking about their being disparaging remark. Listen, there's been analysis in every way to Sunday about people who know more about journalism and that particular topic than me. I'm not going to take away from that, but it also sounds to me too as the let's just say couch sitting Monday morning marketeer. That is, she's worried about something. She's afraid of something coming out. She's controlling the narrative, as we've often advised people to do on this show when they feel like they're attacked by allegations that they don't believe are true. In the word, I'll give Orlando Sentinel writer here, columnist Mike Bianchi a little credit. He's right to quote Shakespeare. Methinks she doth protest too much here. But that's not even what I want to talk about. Between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese last year, the reason why I mentioned it is it was something that was, air quotes, negative in the press. Now, granted, while I didn't personally care about it, whatever. Oh, it's two competitors talking trash on each other. And when they're interviewed about it, they didn't care. But they got a lot of press getting interviewed about it, by the way. Right? What if, regardless of whatever the story comes out and whatever papers the Washington Post is about to sell, you know what just happened during the Women's March Madness? They just grabbed a butt ton more intrigue. This is, see, the way it used to be said is that stars in Hollywood used to seek having trash talked upon them by the late, great Don Rickles, right? And then it became Lisa Lampanelli. I'm sure there's another comedian one could cite that if this dude disses you, you know you've made it. But with women's basketball as a sport, I think the best sign of its growth lately, over and above the people who claim, oh, the men's basketball March Madness is more entertaining and more exciting, I'm more excited for it. And that may be true. Heck, I get it. I haven't been following much March Madness, but I've been checking Caitlin Clark's status. I get it. But the fact that there is so much scandal might be, or rather I should say, not that there's a lot of scandal in it, but there's a lot of negative coverage. There's a lot of noise out there. That might be the hint that that particular sport is starting to get more respected now than it ever did before. So for all the people lining up and, getting all excited and protesting about the LSU coach and all this other stuff, and oh, she's afraid of the truth and all this other stuff. Do you know who the winner overall is? College women's basketball. And by extension, eventually next year, those players getting drafted to the WNBA. And then the next coming players that get made famous in this tournament lead to this, all because of the focus on scandal. So listen, I'm not a fan of soap opera marketeering necessarily, but no, publicity is bad publicity. And I think women's basketball will benefit from that. So anyways, enough about all that. Listen, I know I talked earlier here about the elements of free agency. We've been talking about free agency for the past few weeks here on this show, but I want to get a fantasy spin on it. And let's be honest, I mentioned myself being a couch marketeer. I want to get a little synergy with one of my fellow Jaguar Report guys. So not only does he work with me on Jaguar Report, and we're part of one of the more entertaining group chats I'm in on Twitter, by the way, he also is with the Yards Per Fantasy group. Let's bring him in as well. Zach Shultz on the show. Let me get my mouse actually work. There you go. Good to have you in, Zach.
Hey, what's going on, man? Appreciate it.
Hey, man, listen, I had seen your work, obviously, the Jaguar Report and things like that. You obviously do a lot of fantasy updates there, direct to that team. And you have that unique ability to go with fantasy impact on niche stuff, also in general as well. I mentioned yards per and the work you guys do there too. So I wanted to kind of have an interesting conversation with you about free agency impacts of certain things that have happened lately. And just off the cuff, like, first of all, I don't know about you, but when I think fantasy and the hip drop rule, like, I'm already channeling my inner Scott Van Pelt, where there's going to be a guy who got a catch, let's say behind the line or for less than 5 yards or something like that in a PPR league. But because a hip drop tackle happened, it might get negated for the penalty. So then they would lose that point and lose the game. And just that bad beat world is is there any sort of fantasy impact you might get from the hip drop rule? I'm thinking not, but enlighten me.
Okay. So I love that you just brought up it potentially swinging a matchup, because like in all the years I've been playing fantasy, especially now being involved in fantasy Twitter, you've seen it all, from like how games end and how people lose heartbreaking matchups. I was just bringing it up with my friend recently. Mike Vick was on the timeline. The crazy game, he threw like 6 touchdowns. One of my guys in my league was down like 42.3 points or something, and with just Vick to play, and he wins it by like 0.3. Like, craziest stuff happens in fantasy. So now that you mention it, hip drop tackle to decide a game, it's happening. Put it on your bingo card.
I couldn't take it off the board. And we're talking crazy finishes, I got to bring this up. I played fantasy football 1 year, won the league, and it was on a tie break because Jason Elam hit like a 60-something yard kick that was worth like his kicker in total had 29 points.
Jeez.
And yeah, it was stupid. The only reason I won, I happened to have Billy Volek and Drew Bennett on that ridiculous single game receiving yard record. And then the Ravens defense got a touchdown, and the tiebreak was who had more touchdowns. I won on that tiebreak. It was absolutely stupid. Anyways,
you know what? As stupid as that sounds, the karma swung your way for the 29-point kicker on the other side. I think karma evened you out there, man.
I couldn't agree more. But I like telling that story for those that know the reaction was everything. Please check the YouTube feed to get Zach's face on that. That was absolutely priceless. Listen, the real thing I wanted to hit is there's been a lot of movement, obviously. I mean, there's always some movement in every free agency, but I think there were some very unique moves surrounding particular skill positions, right? Everything from quarterbacks changing teams to quarterbacks basically losing their veteran weapon base. And there's just a lot going on. So I want you to come in and help the world at large here as we get closer and closer to that fantasy draft season about what players increased or decreased their value here. What was the biggest impact for fantasy players? And let's go ahead and start with quarterbacks. Listen, I'm going to ask some of the obvious questions, and then if you can get that's kind of off the radar, that'd be great. But like, for example, what do you think would be the fantasy impact for Russell Carrington Wilson ending up in Pittsburgh?
Honestly, man, that's tough. I love that he comes out and says, hey, I'm signing the vet minimum like for the team, but maybe the team didn't want to pay you a crap load of money, and you this is the only chance you got, man. And now you got Justin Fields on your tail. I don't know. I don't think the leash is going to be long. Not a dude I'm reaching for in fantasy. And if I'm going to draft a Steelers quarterback this year, I'm going for Fields all the way because he's got the rushing. And I would be willing to bet that he's probably starting by week 6 to 8, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that's been a common thing I've seen about the start by week 8. And not to mention, I mean, as a rusty guy, one who is, definitely appreciated him as a player later in his career where he actually started to seem to improve in Seattle. He's not what he used to be. I think he just couldn't perform to that contract, and he was hurt. What was it, the 2 seasons ago? I mean, it's a risk, but I mean, listen, we've heard all the talk enough about Justin Fields being a great insurance policy, especially for only getting him for a bag of Skittles. What are some other quarterback impacts? What are some other quarterback values that might have changed based on the free agency?
Well, I think your big one here is obviously Kirk Cousins, because that is a domino effect big time on that offense. Some of the stuff I wrote down for him. So obviously with Atlanta getting a new coaching staff, they brought Zach Robinson over from the Rams. And you've seen that offense. Obviously, it's a McVay offense, but like these dudes who've been branching off have kind of stuck to the script for the most part, as far as the offenses are ran. 2022. Oh, and I guess, going back to Kirk in 22 with his last full season, Kevin O'Connell also taking you back to the Rams. Just threw the ball an absurd amount, 643 attempts in the air that year for him. He had 5,056 air yards, number 3 in the league. He threw 67 deep balls. They were just absolutely lighting it up through the air that year. Trends were continuing the same till the Achilles happened. He's not a dude I'm worried about with the Achilles. He's got enough time for the season to start, and his game is not predicated on pocket movement or running or anything like that. And then I think that also helps in that regard that you're looking at. He's going to be paired with Zach Robinson, who's working with the essentially same type of quarterback in Stafford. Now, obviously, I still think I'd still take Stafford over Kirk. Sure. But you go what I mean. But the Rams offense has been slinging it with him. I don't expect that to change here going into Atlanta, which I think is going to be huge for London and Pitts. And I think it's going to be a negative for Bijan, even though he does get work in the passing game. It's just a rough go for Bijan drafters, man, because all the talent in the world, all the hype in the world, you get Arthur Smith bad this year. You draft the guy in the first round, you're so pumped, and Arthur Smith is like, not so fast, my friend. And it's just horrible to deal with all year long. And now they go bring in Kirk Cousins, and they're going to probably throw the ball 600 times a game. Or, I mean, a game, who knows, maybe, but 600 times a year. And it's just not ideal for Bijan, I don't think.
Yeah. By the way, I love the thought of Smith channeling Lee Corso right there. That was a great, vision right there. No, and I hear you. With Bijan, one could hope that he's the check down option. And that might boost him a bit. But yeah, he's a guy whose value on the field as a decoy or as somebody to spread in offense is going to be why Kirk would get a healthy amount of points. But yeah, his overall production as a running back would go down. I hadn't thought of that. It's a good point.
And even currently in best ball drafts, he's still like a first round pick.
Sure.
And miss me with that. I'm pretty much on the 0 running back train, especially early like that. But if you're drafting a running back in the first, I need that guaranteed volume, and I need to have 0 concerns about it, like McCaffrey. And you just aren't going to get that with Bijan.
I wasn't going to go to running backs immediately, but now that you brought it up, another guy that might get some consideration from people based on free agency movement, one has to consider Derrick Henry in Baltimore. What do you think of his value increasing or decreasing there?
So that's an interesting one, because his right now, if you're drafting best ball at the moment, you can get Derrick Henry. Let's see, I just had it here in the 4th round, I want to say, and that is lower than where he was. Oh, I lied. He's down at 59. So the tail end of round 5. And that's behind where he was getting drafted last year, which I'm not really sure why that's happening. If anything, I would bump him up a little bit.
Yeah.
Like just the equity in that offense instantly is just like you just rocket him up there because he's got, like, fantasy aside, you've just got now the dual weapon thing with him and Lamar,
Mhm.
and it is like the perfect complement. You got Lamar who can go make everybody miss, but then now all of a sudden you've got that second half Derrick Henry in the lineup who they can just turn the reins to and just pound the crap out of you when they need to. And it's the perfect type of team to do it with too. So, like, real football fit, it's fantastic. I think it's going to translate to fantasy. Um, Derrick Henry and Tyjae Spears last year combined for 45 red zone carries, and Henry had 10 goal line carries. Baltimore running backs combined for 69 red zone carries, and Gus Edwards himself had 15 goal line carries. So Gus Edwards alone had 5 more goal line carries than Henry last year. So you're talking touchdown, equity through the charts here. I don't get it why his ADP is currently falling. I bet you you'll see him higher than that by time like redraft season's around.
Okay, yeah, and I think the only element of that might, and I'll put that in air quotes, be risky. You were mentioning the red zone carries there. I feel like this is something where Lamar Demetrius Jackson will maybe steal some touchdowns from him because they opted to, run him directly. Because Derrick Henry, listen, if I can get a guy who's the closest thing to, like, let's say a Larry Zonka or one of these old 60s, 70s guys that were fullbacks, it is Derrick Henry. I ain't going to use him for that, but he would be that. And he could be an excellent lead option for Lamar, no question. He might take some touchdowns, or that could go the other way. I think that's coming, some of that nitpicky uncertainty that might be dropping him, but I'm with you. To drop him that much seems a bit, how you say, a little too worried about what's going on with him there. There's another direction I want to go. Let's go back to quarterbacks for a second. Justin Herbert lost his 2 veteran wide receivers, man. Now, I'm assuming he's still going to be slinging it something crazy because he's Justin Herbert. And, losing Austin Eckler, like, and going to a Harbaugh offense right there, you have to think his production, points-wise at least, is going to be lower, right?
That is one I would 100% agree with you on. Like, he's got to go down in value. Like you said, he's losing those targets. Mike Williams is just insane as far as, is chucking it down there, and he's going to jump up and get it. Keenan is just a target monster, gets open, in the zone. 2 great receivers you're losing, and now you got to take the jump from Quentin Johnson. Like, no thanks on that. But yeah, like you said, with Harbaugh coming, like, this is a team we might see run 25 times a game now, and that is a problem because Herbert doesn't run. He needs high passing volume to be the fantasy quarterback that people think he is, or I guess he can be, but like that, that they just would expect from him, I guess. And without that super high volume and take away those weapons, there is some concern for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and let's mention the weapons in question. Like, there's been a lot of receiver movement here. We'll get to Calvin Ridley in a second. I get it, but with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, their respective values, I'm very intrigued to see what happens with Keenan Allen in particular, being thrown to by a quarterback to be named Caleb Williams. But what do you think of his value now?
I think it goes down a little in the sense that in that Chargers offense, he was seeing, probably 150 targets last couple seasons. Just shooting off the top of my head, but he's catching over 100 balls easily. The volume was insane, and that offense was scoring so much. You're just not going to see the passing volume. You might see the passing volume out of the Bears this year, depending on that defense too. But I don't think the surefire numbers are going to be there for Keenan because, like, man, I was taking him in like second, third round turn last year.
Yeah.
And that was great value for him. But I don't know if I'm touching that this year because I don't think the offense as a whole is going to be lighting it up like the Chargers that we've seen the last few years.
And what about with Mike Williams? You think he'll be the same thing? Where I feel like he's a guy whose value might maintain. He'll just be wearing a different jersey.
That's a tough one because, you know, he gets the Rodgers boost, I guess, you know, but like, man, I think he's going to be a guy that he's going to be low enough that I'm going to be willing to take that shot because especially with Garrett Wilson on the other side. Yeah, it's going to open up some stuff for him. And I don't know where he's getting drafted right now, but especially in best ball, I'd be interested because he is a great best ball, you know, boomer bust guy.
Yeah, I like how you went with the Hamilton Lin Mandel defense. You're not going to let them take your shot. I'm with that. Anyways, let's get to it, man. Calvin Ridley, walk me, because first of all, my attitude is that his volume goes down. Not so much because he's not in Jacksonville anymore and the clear number one, air quotes, deep threat or any of that. I mean, even when it came to catching one-on-one balls, Zay Jones was a bigger factor than he was. I think you'll agree with that. But there's three things actually that prevent a receiver from scoring in my mind. A, dropping the damn ball. B, drawing DPIs while they move the field. Your receiver as a fantasy owner don't get the points. And then C, if your quarterback is throwing a butt ton of interceptions like I expect Will Levis to do, that too is another factor. Am I on par for a good logic on why Calvin Ridley's value is going to go down?
Oh, I think you're dead on. I mean, it comes from bias on my end that I think Levis stinks. So like, I mean, you know, that's part of the evaluation though. Like, I don't think the quarterback's good, so I'm not going to put, you know, too much stock into that offense. And, you know, they say follow the money a lot, and especially in fantasy, that can be a pretty good adage to follow. Like, you know, go after the people who are getting paid because the teams are, hey, I'm paying this guy, give him the damn ball. Like, so it's usually pretty solid. But here, all of a sudden, everybody's getting the money. Like, they clearly invested pretty highly in Spears to take over for Henry. Not that he's making the money yet, but like the investment's there. They bring in Tony Pollard. They traded for Hopkins last year. You know, now they give Ridley the bag. There's so many mouths there now that I'm not putting the stock in it until I see it. It's one of those things. Right. And yeah, until they show me that like you know, they can have one dude be a dominant receiver or they are going to give it to one running back, you know, pretty reliably, like count me out.
Well, and I hear that too. Well, Paul, I'll put it this way: the move to Derrick Henry, or of Derrick Henry leaving, shows me that they're fully committed to slinging the rock, and Pollard being there is so they have a guy that can do that with a bit more speed than Henry. But I think we're ruling out Tajay Spears that you mentioned him earlier. Of course, he's an excellent guy at backfield. And listen, I covered him a few times with my work covering UCF with the black and gold banneret. I'm not doing a Bing. My voice isn't right. But, you know, seeing him and the damage he did with Tulane in those games too, I really think that's something where while the Titans tight end situation, Titans tight end, there's a tongue twister for you, it isn't the strongest. I feel like Spears and Pollard would be that drop down, but all that would be is fewer balls for Ridley, to your point. So yeah, I think as a fantasy value, Ridley goes down. Does it make the Titans roster better than it was? Oh yeah, we haven't even mentioned Burks yet. Goodness gracious. Yeah. Does it make
forgot about him? Yeah, shit.
like the Titans roster is better, but I don't feel like Ridley's value's there. I'm with you on that. So let me let you take the realm here, man, or the reins here. What's some other significant free agent stuff that you see that's going to be the biggest impact, positive or negative?
Okay, so I talked about Kirk Cousins coming to Atlanta, and so I'm going to take a hot moment to pump up some Drake London because right now, best ball drafts, 45th overall, wide receiver 27. That's pretty crazy to me that the number one wide receiver on an offense we're projecting to throw like as often as they are is going at wide receiver 27, first of all. like, to me, that says, hey, we're bringing Desmond Ridder back and we're giving it another go. Wide receiver 27 for Drake London. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Last year with Ridder, he was getting drafted at wide receiver 12, 27th overall in like the 4th round. So to me, the fact that he's dropped that far is just people they got stung by him and they don't want to go back. So take advantage. This dude had 31.6 percent of his team air yards last year. He had 1,249 air yards, and he had a 73.4% catchable target rate. Instantly, last season in the half a season Kirk played, 82.3. That's a 9% increase right off the bat. Like it's tangible in the numbers. He's going to get 100 plus targets again. He already was in a lower volume offense. His positive TD regression is coming. He has, I want to say, 3 touchdowns his rookie year. He only had 2 this past year. Like I said, we talked about the offense getting better. The volume's coming like at a higher clip. Yeah. There's going to be more points. What are we doing here with Drake London? I'm really confused by this one. To me, I'm drafting him over DK Metcalf. Give me him over Michael Pittman. Give me him over Keenan Allen. Like, these are all dudes who are getting drafted before him at wide receiver that I would easily take London over.
Yeah, and I mean, based on Josh Freeman's comment, that's his quarterback. Raheem Morris, his comments in Atlanta, hey, if we needed a quarterback, or excuse me, if we had the quarterback, we wouldn't have a problem. I wouldn't be here. That whole piece, I think, is telling that they're looking to throw the ball a lot. Not to mention the greatest agent in sports, in Kirk Cousins' agent, getting him another bag. And by the way, we haven't even mentioned yet a point I like to make with my fantasy people is schedule matters, and you're playing in a weak NFC South. That's the triple crown for me on why that makes a lot.
Absolutely.
Anybody else you want to point out?
We're Jags guys here, so let's talk some Gabe Davis. Sure. Now, he's been like a much maligned dude in the fantasy world because he was the dude that everyone's sleeper the first couple of years, that they're, hey, this guy's tall and he's fast and he's going to be that X receiver. And people just typecasted him wrong from the start. It drove his fantasy value way up. And like his second year in the league, it was getting outrageous to where people were drafted him in like 4th, 5th round and stuff. Now, last year it cooled off a ton. And it's cooling off again, and that's fine. Let's see where he's at right now. Gabe Davis, wide receiver 58, about 138 overall. So that's what, 11, 12 rounds, somewhere in there. And I'd be all over that right now. Trevor is dying for a receiver to go deep.
Yeah.
How many times do you sit there and watch Red Zone and Josh Allen just slings one deep and Gabe is like multiple steps behind the defensive back? Last time that's happened in Jacksonville, Jimmy Smith.
I was going to say, Jimmy? Yeah.
Right. Like, it's legit been that long. Now you've got legit speed because Trevor tries to do this with Zay. They want Zay to be this guy so bad, and he is fast, and he does a good job, but he's never like steps behind the dude. And I think you're going to see Davis's game speed show up in that offense this year. He had 24 deep targets last year, and his average depth of target was 15 yards on the dot, which was 8th in the league. So like, obviously the front office knew what this guy is and bringing him in for this exact reason. He had 11 red zone targets last year. He developed great chemistry with Allen as kind of that scramble drill guy, which Trevor takes advantage of as well. I think real football wise, this is a match made in heaven for Trevor. And where Davis is going to end up getting drafted, I think he's a super value. But there's an asterisk on that because are they going to make a trade for a guy? Are they going to draft a guy early at wide receiver? That offense, I think, there could be another domino to fall that throws a wrench in things. But for now, where Gabe Davis is going, love it.
Yeah, no, and well, let's put it this way. If there's somebody they draft that actually cracks the field And like theoretically speaking, if you're looking at the Jags receiver core, and I went over this with Jamal St. Cyr last week, if they get onto the field, they got to get past Zay to do it. And if they can do that, that's a significant talent. If that happens, I'm with you. I think that'll be an issue. But another factor on this Jags receiver core is your tallest pass catcher that's not a tight end just went out the door. Gabe Davis, to his credit, does provide that height. And I also think he catches these passes that Calvin dropped last year. Call it what it is. Maybe it's more of my bias as he's one of the first receivers that I covered that went high in the pros. I mean, it was Traquan Smith and then it was him. Of course, I'm referring to my time covering UCF football. And, I know he's a go up and get it guy. He's a guy that maybe didn't get as many targets as a Jerry Jeudy, but late in the season, he had about as many touchdowns and he had about as high an average catch, average yards per catch. There we go. Anybody else you want to drop in here before we wrap up?
Okay, I got two more guys real quick. One, I wanted to mention Saquon.
Sure.
Saquon's still going and getting drafted real high. Once again, love the fit for real life. I don't like it in fantasy. The Giants ran this dude into the ground the last few seasons, 643 touches over the last 2 years. I mean, and they should have. Like, I don't blame him at all. Like, this dude's on your contract and he's damn good at football. Give him the ball. But now that you're, a running back who's starting to hit that aging point for a running back, like that is a real concern.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for Saquon, I think he recognizes that as well. And especially with the contract stuff he's fought with, the tag and, the stuff he's been dealing with the last few seasons.
Oh, yeah.
I think he understands where he's at, and he was willing to sign with Philly to chase the good team, chase the wins. And even if it is at a slight financial risk. But with all that said, the shove is still still legal. So you're losing so many instant goal line carries because they're just going to shove it in, which is fine because it works. But like you're instantly losing that for Saquon. Goal line carries out the window for him. And now he's suddenly not exponentially the most talented player on the offense. Like that was the thing with the Giants. It was he is like you're playing, middle school football and you get the one kid who's way better than everyone else. That was the Giants offensive roster. And it's just like, go give it to Saquon. And so the volume was constantly there. The passing work was there. Like he was a monster. Well, he is a monster of a player, but he was a monster in fantasy because he's a monster player combined with monster volume. And if you take away that monster volume, I'm knocking him back in my rankings. And then the last one I wanted to bring up real quick was the Marquise Brown, Rashee Rice situation.
I was good. I'm glad you brought that up. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, after he signed with the Chiefs, and I don't think this is going to have much of an impact on Rice. People are freaking out. They're totally different players. I think, well, especially this season, the Chiefs' offense was dying for a deep player they could rely on. And Rice
piece. I'm glad you.
Yeah. Rice is just not that dude. Like so Brown is not coming in to fill a niche that Rice is filling. Like they're totally different players. A lot of Rice's targets come underneath. They're letting him work in space. And his snap rate the second half of the season, his lowest snap rate was 72.2. So like the dude was on the ascent. The coaching staff clearly loves him. And then you look at his production down the stretch too. And now you get an over the top threat in Hollywood Brown, who is actually a good, deep threat. You combine those two. Honestly, I could see this improving Rashee Rice, because how often are the Chiefs sitting there on offense and the other team's playing a soft zone or something, and Mahomes just like, whatever, fine. We're gonna audible into this screen, and Rice is gonna go get 7 yards, and he might get 14 too. But like, they are so willing to just take, the cliche, take what you give them. And if you have actual deep threat that's not going to fumble fingers every time he's wide open, well, maybe that is going to impact positively on Rice. So if anything, I'm equal on Rice or more, or I'm higher on value in him. And I'm also higher on Hollywood because he's just taking the massive offense jump. So I'm cool with both of them.
Yeah, I mean, from moment one, your quarterback is now Patrick LaVon Mahomes II. I mean, point break. You're done there. We're good. I also see a potential for less production from an aging Travis Michael Kelce. This isn't me saying he's bad. He just turns 35 during this season. I think that's a factor. I love your statement in Rashee Rice because even at the end of the day, I feel like Hollywood Brown will improve his value, but he and Gabe Davis have this commonality. I like to call them a lottery ticket player. You're going to have weeks where they go away. You're also going to have weeks where they have, if they average a touchdown a game, you're good with value. And they're going to have games where they may get more than one. And at least one of them is going to be a big ball. Those guys are both big ball catchers. That's their particular game. And then you mentioned Rice. I like your take that he's going to keep his value. I'll call him the de facto number one receiver in the offense last year. And listen, I seen Rashee Rice play as well. Him coming out of SMU, I think it was. But he was a player in the American Athletic Conference. I know that in UCF's final year. Bing, he came to Orlando. That's what I have to do with the Bings right now for the black and gold. Again, the voice. But seeing him come to FPC Mortgage Stadium, and he didn't they didn't win the game, and he had some, let's just put it this way, there were some moments where he looked like a Chiefs receiver in that game with some of the drops he had, but the speed and separation ability were there. I think it's going to be a youth play. I see Rashee Rice having the next 2 years positive improvement just on the strength of him being there with Andy Reid and Patrick LaVon Mahomes II. I did your second one first. Let me go back to Saquon Barkley. First of all, good job kissing up to the host. I don't know if you're looking behind me here, but that's my Aaron Evans original of me playing offensive line back in my days of semi-pro football. So there's that. And the respect for the QB sneak in this building will always be taken. However, here's another thing I think that'll kind of reduce Saquon's fantasy value. And that's the Eagles coaching staff. They spent so much time wasting Swift's value by refusing to go up and take the quarterback under center. Hurts was constantly handing the ball off from the shotgun, which reduces what you can do with the running back. Now, maybe Saquon will get some good passing production. That's fine. But if you're taking the run carries away from a running back, instinctually, that reduces the fantasy value, right?
Absolutely. I mean, volume is king, especially when you're drafting that high. Like, if you're looking at a big hit in his volume, I'm not touching him till probably third, fourth round tops. And even then, I'm still thinking about it. Now, the one thing I'll give him here is, like I mentioned, he's not exponentially just the most talented player anymore. That could help him sometimes because, he's a home run hitter at the same time. So maybe things do get freed up for him slightly. But overall, I'm way lower than consensus currently on Saquon.
Yeah, that's a great point you make, though. They do have A.J. Brown. That could keep people from stuffing the box looking for him as they would back in his Giants days. Goodness knows the Jags tried to take the ball away from him or take him out of the game 2 years ago, and Daniel Jones ended up with 100 yards rushing because of it. I mean, I get it. Listen, don't get me off on the tangent on Brian Daboll winning Coach of the Year on the strength of his playbook game, give the ball to Saquon. I'm just saying, Zach, man, I had fun with that segment, dude. I'm glad you came on. I'm glad we did the Jaguar report. Synergy, man, I got to get some of these other guys on too. I know Ship made it on for preseason last year. You made it in. I'm glad to hear it. Tell the people where you can be found, Zach Shultz.
All right. Go find me on Twitter. My tag's at the bottom if you're watching YouTube, or it's SCHU1TZY. It's basically my last name, Shultz, except the L's a 1. And other than that, go to yardsperfantasy.com. If you are in a dynasty league, the thing we have a lot of fun doing is people will buy the package we have on there that, a group of us will get on and do a podcast reviewing your league.
Oh, nice.
And we've had a ton of fun with those. We don't take it seriously. It's like we do some research, obviously, and some note taking stuff, but for the most part, it's mostly off the cuff, just like us shooting the shit with each other, and we talk a lot of crap to the people in the leagues.
Because
it's just a really fun time. So, and that's what fantasy is all about, is like making fun of each other because they drafted poorly, and so if you want some other random losers online to do that to you and pay us to do it, yardsperfantasy.com.
Hey, listen, there are gluttons for punishment out there, but they'll at least get good analysis in the process. Yards per fantasy, one of my cohorts in the Jaguar report. Thanks for jumping in and honor, joy, and privilege, brother. Looking forward to the next one, man. We'll do this again sometime.
Heck yeah, dude. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
All right, man. There's Zach Shultz. Great time coming in there too. We don't talk a ton of fantasy, but I got some comments here tonight. Let's look through some of these. See, Valhalla Revenge. I just like that name. I had to show that. Good to see you jump in the building. Got to shout out Drew Willingham in here. What's up, fellas? He says, and he's respecting me playing hurt with the Bing. Give some love to Sertopa Media. Bing, bing, bing. I don't know. So give some love to Sertopa Media, one of our YouTube partners, along with the Huddle Up Podcast Inc. Yes, Sertopa Media, where the struggle is real. To be awesome. A lot of fun working with him as well there too. Yeah, they're coming out to support tonight. You gotta respect it. And hey, Drew throwing some love over to Zach for jumping in. Solid guest. Yeah, I thought so too. That was fun. With that in mind, speaking of solid guests, it's time to talk a little bit of spring football. Earlier, I was able to catch up with Reid Johnson of the Markcast. We're going to go ahead and jump into that beast right now. When it comes time to talk spring football, granted, there may be no XFL. Maybe spring football is decided to diss my home state. Maybe that's the whole thing, but we still got to give it its proper due. And I'm going to do that with the help of my good friend from the Markcast, Reid Johnson. Thanks for jumping in again, my guy.
Of course, they've abandoned both of our states. I mean,
also, Rip Sea Dragons. What a fun team, too. Not for nothing.
It was funny. The other day, I was tagged Brandon Silvers, who's now with the Battlehawks. He was with the Dragons, and then he was with the Houston team. A photo of a 2020 XFL Dragons chair still at, like, so we're still there, but 4 years later, can you tell that the spring league is trying to make the most of the resources it has?
Hey, man. And that's what these things kind of do. I mean, it's like I talked about in the intro with, women's sports boosting up and scandal, even uplifting men. Take anything you can get to build up the brand. I'm with it, man. Or save costs. I don't know. But, and with that in mind, we mentioned the XFL USFL merging entity, the UFL. I don't know why they did that. I'm not trying to think about the Tuskers anymore, but whatever. So with all that in mind, the UFL kicks off March. And I know you got a big event for it, doing things like you. Tell us about your event this weekend, man.
Yeah, so UFL kickoff this weekend, week 1 here, a little bit later, right? The XFL did the February right after the Super Bowl, the weekend after. Right. USFL before like the April start that got players out of the playoffs and championship right into the training camp, which might have been a little too late just based on kind of some of the players we saw stick to rosters. But this year, the late announced merger, I think news came out originally in September, and then it was a couple months later. We're trying to do all this in about 2 months. So we delayed the kickoff March 30th in Arlington. We'll be there live, and then there's 2 games on Saturday and 2 games on Sunday for 10 weeks of regular season coverage.
And so let me ask you this then too, based on how you kind of said that, would it be a reasonable expectation, should we get to 2025 UFL, that they would want to take advantage of that February immediate post Super Bowl withdrawal? Because I really loved that last year.
It depends who you ask. So we had Daryl Johnston on last week, Moose Johnston, with he's the EVP now of football ops so he's kind of with basically he was with the USFL. Now we have Russ Brandon with the XFL, and now they're kind of the co-heads of football. I think Russ Brandon is president and CEO, I think is what they have. They changed his title a lot, but I asked Daryl that, and he said that they certainly would look at tweaking. The USFL really, the idea with this whole merger is we're really merging these two philosophies. So, and we can talk about the rules and all of that later, but USFL likes the later start, XFL likes the earlier start. Either way, we're competing with March Madness. I like the April, at least TV wise, but then you're competing with a lot of stuff going into the summer. To me, the February feels better, and it feels better for players having rest and then being able to get to the NFL camps in the summer versus walking off the field into another training camp.
Yeah, I definitely agree from that standpoint as well. And listen, the XFL performed well enough competing with March Madness games. And I think there were certain steps they took to trying out games at different days and different times as well that I thought that was unique there too. But speaking of combining rules and rules changes, listen, man, I don't know how excited you are to see the NFL adopt the new kickoff style. First of all, something that actually shows giving a damn about player safety, but I've spoken enough on the mantle of DeMar Hamlin and Joe Flacco in weeks past. So we'll leave that as an aside. But hey, how cool is it to see the NFL paying attention and adopt that? How helpful is that to spring leagues to kind of show their worth? And how crazy is it that they're also not doing it themselves? To walk me through all of this, Reid. I don't know what's going on.
Well, it's interesting. And so Sam Schwartzstein, who's credited with kind of inventing the XFL kickoff rule back in 2020, I would call him a good friend of the show. We converse quite a bit. He's been on a couple times. He's actually working with Amazon Prime now and kind of the NFL division for them and running a lot of analytics. And he even does like on camera stuff. But they tested it for the 2 years leading into the XFL kickoff. He has the numbers here. I was looking this up before. 92% return rate. 0 injuries, 29-yard line average starting position. So the XFL or the NFL, as we know, tried to do the fair catch and all that last year. Very few returns, very few kind of anything. It was basically kind of a wasted play. So now they are adopting. Of course, they have to tweak it, so it's not the 35-yard line. It's the 30 for a starting position. If there's certain penalties and things if the ball goes out of bounds, but of course, they have to put their own spin on it because, God forbid, we just say we're taking Sam Schwartzstein's kickoff. But the interesting thing is, yes, the merged XFL USFL league is not using that kickoff this year because them, according to Daryl Johnston, who was on my show last week, which I asked about, wanted to mirror more the NFL traditional game. And now the XFL adopting it, a week before the kickoff is insane to me and shows hubris in a way that is very. I would love to know how these negotiations went between these two leagues trying to get to this position.
Yeah, I can't account for that. By the way, on the Markcast that you mentioned there where Daryl Johnston was on, is there a particular reason he gave for at least currently foregoing that process?
Yeah, he said they liked the movement of the kickoff. They wanted to keep the movement. And then what he said, and I do think this is a somewhat valid point, is the other players involved with the special teams return, so the blockers and a lot of that, they were getting spotlighted as well, so then they could transfer to special teams in the NFL. The problem is now that the NFL isn't going to use that kickoff, it doesn't translate one-to-one. And we see that a lot with the CFL game. I'm like, well, if it doesn't look the same, and the scouts and da-da-da-da-da. But yeah, a lot of the reasons that we're given are kind of moot now that this is, at least for this season. I mean, I'm sure they could revert back later, but at least the NFL going forward with this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. By the way, I forgot to give you your appropriate bing, but that's because my voice is a mess. So the bell isn't working, Markcast. That's what I'm telling you, Reid. It's not working. The bell playing hurt is a thing here on the Student of the Game this time. I'm sorry, but I think that. Well, I'll put it this way. I think it's certainly an error. I don't know if the issue was that the rules committee, the owners meeting, was scheduled too late for them to be able to pivot. And to your point, it would have been the negotiations and all that they made happen. And I don't know. Frankly, I just like the XFL's product a bit better. Granted, I did watch a lot more of it as I was local here to the Guardians. I was covering them on a regular basis here at Camping World Stadium. So, call that regional bias as much as you want. But speaking of mentioning certain teams, listen, man, take me into what's going to be most hype for the coming season, because I know a lot of the top XFL teams are making the swing, right? The Defenders are back of DC, the St. Louis Battlehawks, the Houston Roughnecks, all who were forces in the proper I shouldn't say proper, all who were forces in the XFL, such as it is. I think, the Arlington Renegades are going to open the action there as the XFL champs playing the previous UFL champs, the Stallions. I think all of that is fantastic stuff. But give me, I'm going to be a Jordan Tiamu guy. As much as I'm going to talk trash about you're not in Florida, I'm not going to lie and act like I'm not going to watch a little bit of Tiamu doing his thing. But what are some other things that XFL fans can get hyped for this league about, or just the general public should watch for as things that'll be exciting that are going to take place this season?
Yeah, it's interesting. And so just the keynote there, is with the Houston Roughnecks is now the rebranded Houston Gamblers. So that was part of the negotiations to win in. So we still have 4 XFL and 4 USFL teams in the conferences, but it's the new look Gamblers. So a lot of the problems that the Gamblers had back in 2023, they're carrying over into this year. People are really high on the Stallions, as they should be for the USFL. They have the most continuity, having played, 2 seasons. They won both seasons with the USFL coming in here, going into Arlington. If you track the XFL last season, Arlington went into the playoffs with a losing record and kind of, got hot right at the end and kind of won the championship. So curious to kind of see that way. It's been hard covering this, as with training camps taking place in Arlington. The teams are playing in their markets, but, coverage of it is sparse, if that makes sense, right? You have some coach interviews and things like that, Zoom calls, but still waiting on depth charts, still waiting on quarterback allotments for a lot of these teams. And I know that fantasy people and sports betting people get upset with that as well, because we're trying to provide coverage for all of this. But Brahmas looks scary, bad, if that makes sense. They're my team that I kind of adopted with the Sea Dragons going away. But some of these USFL teams didn't seem like they got a lot better. We heard a lot about the merging of this talent and all these all-star teams now, but we still have quarterback concerns with a lot of the teams that aren't Arlington, St. Louis, and Birmingham.
Sure, and well, it's funny. Arlington did what they did. For those that didn't see, like, they started out with one quarterback, and had issues with performance and injury. They took a quarterback from another squad in the now defunct Las Vegas Vipers, who the team was terrible, but they took that quarterback and won the championship in the playoffs. I got a chance to talk to him here. He actually played, I think, either his first or second start against the Guardians. And here, stop me, you've heard this before, Reid, a close game involving the Orlando Guardians, such as they were, right? And that was all just a strange but yet fun development to watch, the kind of thing you expect and enjoy from a plot twist that only spring football could bring, right?
Well, it's, and it's one of those things. Luis Perez has been around all of it. I mean, he's with AF and the XFL 2020, and he played in the USFL. And so cool to see him, as someone that's tracked his journey, and he's been on the show. He was in the Spring League. He was on the Jousters. To see him get handed the championship trophy by Danny Garcia on The Rock, I think if you had asked him 6 years earlier, I'd be like, this is crazy. So good for him, excited for him. And, they're rolling with him, at least coming out the gate with Arlington. Bob Stoops seems really happy with him.
And you mentioned Bob Stoops, and whether it's Stoops, Reggie Barlow, Wade Phillips now with the other Texas team, such that that's not the Roughnecks, but was the Roughnecks, and all of the rebranding. Is this merger going to expose kind of, for lack of a better way to describe it, a coaching advantage at the hands of the XFL?
Well, I think I think all of these coaches now, we don't have any first-time coaches. So I think the XFL last year, and you had the Terrell Buckley, and love Coach Buck, and he was on our the championship game show and the stream, and he was a very good friend, a very gracious friend of the podcast. But you had a lot of these coaches coming in and had never. It's a different beast, and it's you got 5 weeks to kind of get these guys going, and then the resources and everything, it's all the spring football kind of stuff. And so I think now they've all been through this cycle, whether it's the USFL side or the XFL side. So I do anticipate at least that way with staff. I do know there's some consolidating of some of the positions, right? So certain coaches are like, I think Jonathan Heimbach for the Arlington Renegades, he was on the show. I think he's the O-line coach and then like co-special teams coordinator. So I think we're kind of merging some of those to save money, but at least the, OC, DC, HUD coaches, I think there's a lot of continuity there.
Also, another thing that comes with experienced coaches, Reid, is it'll be something where, and as another example that offshoots this, UCF's own coaching staff has co-offensive coordinators, but it's a way to promote a guy and keep him on and kind of bump his cash without giving him giving the other guy a demotion, and other guy, I should say, a demotion. The former running back coach at UCF, Tim Harris, is now a co-offensive coordinator, for example, to that staff to prevent, hey, we want you on, but we don't want to demote anybody. So here, we'll put the code title on there, that kind of thing too. It all is kind of a multi-purpose save to save money and do that as well. But the reason why I bring up college coaches is to opportunity to segue to this, Reid. And you mentioned Bob Stoops, right? So goodness, what year was it? I believe it was 2020, whatever year Maurice Leonard Fournette sat out the Citrus Bowl, right? 5 years after that, Kirk Ferentz, right, the oldest active college coach, Iowa, right, was there. And I asked him leading into that particular game, Iowa, Kentucky, at the Citrus Bowl. I asked him about that 5-year anniversary. Now, this is, 2 or 3 years ago now, but he said he got a text from Bob Stoops saying to him, I don't know how you're still doing it. Now, take that sentiment, Reid. Does this mean this will be kind of a place where former great college coaches may come to coach in the future over and above Bob Stoops? Because I feel like this is an opportunity for guys that want to coach and don't want to be executives may end up. I'm not saying there's a team that's going to suddenly hire Nick Saban or Bill Belichick or something like that, but I don't know. Let's say a Dabo Swinney or somebody like that who's definitely been out there as anti the current state of college football and coaching with NIL and all that is a thing. Do I need to get my tinfoil hat, or do you think there's some there that this could happen in the future of this league?
No, I mean, I think it's a good schedule, right? I think it's a good opportunity for new coaches as well, right? Former players, and we saw Hines Ward last year kind of do all that as well and dip his toes in that. But I do, because it's one of those things. I can go live in Texas for 3 months. I can kind of go do the rest of my things after that. We do a little bit of scouting during the summer. I got DPPs or whatever, kind of working on that. I do agree. I think, and that's why Bob Stoops is like, I'm happy to be back. The Texas guy, I'm able just to kind of be here. And I do agree with that. I don't know how, let me say this, at least in terms of acquiring coaches, I'll be curious moving on, because the XFL coaches are being paid more right now, right? So Mike Mitchell reported that out. They're carrying over their salaries to this second year because they were on a 2-year deal. So I'll be curious when it goes into, if the UFL, this is always the if the UFL comes back next year and then the coaches' salaries are reduced, do we still see that level? Hines Ward is not here this year because he did not want to take a pay cut 2 years down the road. Now, I would still have worked this year and then gotten to 2 years down the road when we get to that. But that is an issue. So we will see that, because the USFL lack of spending is kind of carrying over. Like, all the quarterbacks are getting the same. We're not getting the bump in pay that the quarterbacks were with the XFL. So there's cost savings there that might derail that. But in theory, I like that idea.
Yeah. Well, and if you have guys that walk too, that can be replaced by another entity, I'll put it this way. There's with the coaches being what they are, if they were to get a coach like that with star power, it's a, air quotes, potentially less expensive way to inject something into a particular fan base. But I mean, the point you mentioned earlier is the teams, as far as being run as individuals, is less of a thing. I mean, kind of explain that too. Like, would the individual club be most involved with hiring a new coach like that? I assume so.
Yeah, I mean, it's this, it's the league owned, all the teams, so they're all kind of there. I mean, it's all in a mishmash. Yeah, I would imagine if like Wade Phillips said, I want AJ Smith to come with me to San Antonio to kind of do that. I mean, obviously you have that kind of loyalties and kind of building it that way. But I'll be, like I said, I'll just be curious if we're not paying the coaches as much. I mean, they paid like Hines Ward, according to, and I can't remember the figure Mike Mitchell reported for Sports Illustrated, like he was getting paid a ton of money, right? And they used him a lot. It's like, hey, here's this former coach, and then he. Okay, I'm not interested anymore because I don't want to do this for $100,000 or whatever the salary is. So we'll be curious to see. But again, those are always future concerns, right? I was always like, when Hines Ward's worried about getting a pay cut in 2 years, I'm like, who cares? At least get through this year. Who even knows who it's going to be in next year?
I'll put it this way. And the thing that makes Hines Ward kind of a unique character is he was an executive level guy with the AAF. So I think he's. I'll say that might be him with that experience overthinking the equation. I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
For sure. Who's a standout player that we may not have already known? Because I mentioned, for example, you mentioned Luis Perez, rightly so. I mentioned Jordan Tiamu. Whether you're going to have certain former Bengals back in the house, that kind of thing. Who's somebody else who's starting to jump off the page for you? I know rosters have been difficult to get hands on, but who's somebody we should look out for in this upcoming UFL?
Well, speaking of the Roughnecks, Mark Thompson, who's kind of their standout running back, he was with the USFL, slightly injured right now going into the season, at least maybe the first week. But they're talking about like their entire offense in Houston runs through Mark Thompson, which I'm like, he was great in the USFL, but he was curious because we have Abram Smith on the other hand with the Defenders. He's out for the season, got injured in practice, ACL, I think. So he's gone. Well, they're going to kind of do running back by committee, and they brought in a bunch of guys, and you have Von Hutchins there doing the, kind of the player personnel. But Houston, they're like, oh my God, like Mark Thompson, like really, like your entire offense is built around. So we'll see. I mean, Birmingham, Jamar Smith is looking good. We got AJ McCarron back, right? That was kind of the big story last year with the Battlehawks. They got him back. Brandon Silvers is kind of backing him up now, which is interesting. I think Brandon Silvers is probably like, we're doing this one more ride, and then we're kind of moving on. He's been part of this alphabet soup of all these spring leagues. And I'm looking here at the teams. Memphis still trying to figure stuff out. Michigan as well, kind of both their quarterback issues. Memphis, I think John DeFilippo the other day said, I'm not naming a quarterback you won't know until they walk out on the field. It's probably going to be Case Cookus. He was in the championship game the first season with the Stars, and then I can't remember. Stars got knocked out last season, but we'll see. I mean, you're getting kind of the best of anyone that the USFL had here. We're kind of trotting out here, so some of these guys should do all right.
Yeah, the Sea Dragons had that guy last year with their quarterback, their gunslinger.
Danucci, yeah, he's with the Broncos now. He chose to sign back in there and take that third spot.
Yeah, no, I was all about Bengaducci, like. Just a fun guy, man. And when he came to town, he was fun here playing against the Guardians, and now no longer a thing. But hey, he landed on his feet better than the franchises did. I'll give him that much credit. By pure accident, I'm wearing my Jerry Rice Broncos jersey, so that works out.
Yeah, it didn't seem like he was interested in coming back. I think he was very much like, I'm doing this one time. I'm proving myself, and I have no interest in coming back and quarterbacking, the showboats or whatever.
Yeah, I haven't heard Jordan Thomas here, who would have been that tight end. That was the kind of the Guardians equivalent as well. So I'll say all of this. Since we got you here, can you give us any sort of a prediction on how that opening game is going to go in the champion versus champion match for XFL versus UFL there?
I am very scared for the Renegades, and as someone that tracks a lot of there's a lot of measuring contests between XFL fans and USFL fans, and the ratings, and we got the TV, and the XFL lost all this. There's all this posturing back and forth, and I am afraid that the Stallions are going to come in and just kick the snot out of the Renegades. I mean, it's not like the Renegades have this illustrious home field advantage here. I mean, we're playing at Choctaw Stadium. We'll be there. I was whelmed by the attendance last year. I think it will probably be less than. I can't imagine it's more than it was last year for the kickoff. I don't know if the marketing push for this league has been the equivalent of having two spring leagues kind of working together of this colossal force. I think they're hoping that just we're on good we're on good windows on TV, and we're on good channels. People will find us kind of randomly. But yeah, I think Stallions are going to come in and kick the snot. You have Jamar Smith there with Coach Shultz, and I mean, they've worked together years of kind of building chemistry here at this point.
I mean, listen, I know Marlon Williams and Cole Schneider, both UCF guys, who I'm tied to through my coverage of UCF with the black and gold banneret. Bing! See, still not working. But with all that too, I could be called a homer there, but I too would pick the Stallions in this particular instance. The Renegades just aren't as balanced a team overall. I feel that prediction as well. And looking forward to the opening weekend. Where can they find your special, first of all, on Saturday to check that out?
Yeah, so everything's on the Markcast.com. You can get to our YouTube channel that way. We have the event page and everything's already set up. And you could just Google the Markcast, UFL kickoff, but everything's already there. Be a bookmark, turn on the bells, all that. We'll have lots of people. I think Mike Mitchell's going to be part of it. He's the big UFL insider with Sports Illustrated. We have a couple of people live on location covering the game. We'll be covering the game, and then we'll have people calling in. So it should be fun. Like, it's a weird balance of trying to balance like doing the show there live versus like 98% of people are going to be watching online. So that's kind of what I focus on is the online viewer kind of checking it out. But we should have good coverage. I'm not the biggest football expert, but I can bring in a lot of smart people to kind of ask questions that way.
Yeah. And listen, I like that you asked me to be a part of it. Unfortunately, my parenting life is problematic that particular weekend, but nonetheless, I know I'll check it out after the fact on YouTube and watch all that rock. Mike Mitchell does good work too. That's awesome. You're going to have him on. And listen, anybody following the UFL, check out that special. Check out the Markcast. Reid Johnson doing the thing. Tell the people where you can be found there, Reid.
Yeah, Markcast.com. CFL coverage as well. We'll be ramping that up. We got the draft coming up here, I think, in the middle of next month. And then should be excited. They just got the combine stuff done. We've been doing CFL free agency as well. So not just UFL that carries a lot of the weight kind of here during this time of year, but we'll be covering the CFL and weekly UFL game recaps on Monday. So we'll be doing those kind of throughout the season as well.
By the way, speaking of Canadian football, look out for lineman Sam Jackson on your Red Blacks there. The newest guy to get picked up, also a UCF grad, a guy I talk with a lot. So
Red Blacks have a conscious crisis here coming up, a crisis of conscience. Like, they got to figure out what they're doing. It's been many meandering years now for the Red Blacks. I think it's their 10-year anniversary this year. So it's like you got a lot of pressure that you got to win more than 4 home games in a 21 week season. So
I hope Sam Jack can help part of that turnaround. But appreciate it, Reid. We'll catch you next time, brother.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course, and that'll do it for me tonight as well. I am Kyle Nash, the student of the game. You can find me on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram, the SOTG. Find me on Facebook as the student of the game. Check out my writings with Jaguar Report, 3-point conversion, and the black and gold banneret, as well as my work covering the Orlando Magic with A7 BN Sports. Check out also my podcast, The Duval Dive, a Jaguars podcast, which you can see on all these same streamings here for the student of the game, as I mentioned there, as well as on any of your podcatchers and on 3-point conversions, iHeartRadio channel, as well as the sports block on oldschool101.com, 12 to 2 on Sundays Eastern time. So with all that in mind, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. But until next time, everyone, class dismiss.